Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I am glad you could join me. Make sure you are following and subscribe to the podcast. Go to PASreport.com. From there, you go to any podcast platform that you listen on. And I have a great guest coming on today. He's been on before. He's a friend of the show. I have former retired FBI Supervisory Intel Analyst George Hill coming back. There's so much to talk about in the world. But George, first and foremost, how are you today?
I'm well, Nick. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing well. And, you reached out to me a few weeks ago when the whole Signal chat thing emerged in the media. And you said, be careful what you're listening to, because not everything appears as it seems. So immediately off the bat, what caught your attention?
It didn't sync up with the actions of the U.S. military at the time. We were moving strategic assets into the region already at the time of that Signal call to include B-2 bombers, which were already en route to Diego Garcia at that time. And you don't need a billion-dollar platform capable of dropping a 30,000-pound GBU guided munition specifically built for taking out bunkers to take out the Houthis. Yeah, they do have some underground facilities, but not nearly as robust as the Iranians. And then the final straw that broke the camel's back was the deployment of the USS Carl Vinson going over as well at the same time. To send two carrier strike groups out there for the Houthis is just silly. And so it had all the hallmarks of what's called a haversack, which was a term coined during the First World War by I think it was a British colonel that left a haversack of documents to confuse the Turkish army. And since that time, it's kept that name. The Allies used it again during the Second World War. So it's a pretty common practice. They just did it electronically. And then, to put Goldberg's name into the chat group, the guy who called Trump or said that Trump referred to the men who stormed Pointe du Hoc as, quote, suckers and losers, to me just seemed like a classic Trump troll. I saw that as a little bit of humor. I never bought off on it. And then finally, I think I've been proven right. Nobody's been fired over it.
Yeah, it really is interesting, because when you did say that, a lot of what you were telling me was making sense, that it wasn't about Houthi rebels, that this leak looked to seem, by all appearances, it was intentional to divert attention. And then it seems like everything's lining up with your timeline. So now we're starting to hear in the media everyone talking about Iran. And just so everyone's aware, George Hill was the first one. Okay, then he was the first one on this. He knew that the real target was Iran. What do you think? Now, Iran has agreed to some talks with the United States.
Direct talks, which is a huge deal.
Now, do you think that Iran is just going to try a delay tactic, or do you think that they realize the clock is ticking and maybe they better strike a deal with the nuclear program?
I hate to say this out loud. If Iran had a nuclear weapon, knowing that what's in the theater already and that almost a third of the U.S. Navy fleet is either in theater or on its way, if they had a nuclear weapon, knowing that these assets were coming in to take it out, I think they'd have used that nuclear weapon by now. And I think the look on Netanyahu's face was absolutely incredible when Trump kind of just dropped it on him, euphemism intended, that they're going to engage in direct talks with the Iranians. Netanyahu has wanted Iran off of the global chessboard since he made that speech at the United Nations General Assembly during the Obama administration.
Yeah, and I have to ask you, because the Iranian nuclear program has always fascinated me to a certain degree, because I remember back in 2004, 2005. See, initially the plan, go into Iraq, pacify it quickly, and then maybe look next door at Iran. I think that the real target of the Iraq invasion was to surround Iran, Afghanistan on one side, Iraq on the other, and you could do a pretty good invasion. And back then they were talking about how Iran was only 1 year away from building a nuclear bomb. And they kept on reiterating 1 year away. And here we are 20 years later. Was the intelligence back then, was it wrong? Were the politicians lying? What's going on there?
Here's another thing that regarding the haversack, because it fits perfectly with what you just said. The day that the ODNI, Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, Pete Hegseth, and others were testifying in front of Congress, to include DHS Secretary Noem, they were there to brief the National Threat Assessment, in which said that they do not assess that Iran has a capable platform and nuclear weapons delivery ability. Instead, they spent the whole entire time talking about the leaked signal chat, which is another diversion from away from the real topic. So our own director of national intelligence as recently, as a few weeks ago when they published their findings, do not believe that Iran has a viable nuclear weapon and delivery platform. You got to have both. And so our own defense intelligence entities do not assess that Iran has a nuclear weapon. Yet it looks like we're preparing everything we need to go into Iran to take it out. And if it's just a flex, it's a very expensive flex. When you're taking over 30% of your strategic bombers and moving them halfway around the globe to Diego Garcia, and a third of the Navy's fleet into the region, that's a very expensive flex. So Netanyahu may be getting his wish, but I think the Iranians are going to come to the table. They said direct talks. And they're talking about doing a Libya with them, which is no, we're not doing inspectors. We're not doing third party. You either let the United States in and we're going to watch you destroy the stuff, or we're going to drop those GBUs.
I mean, that's obviously the smartest way to do it. And you have to be able to get rid of the nuclear program before they actually build out a bomb. But how long do you think the Trump administration is willing to give talks? I mean, I don't anticipate with these military assets out there, you're going to keep them out there for an indefinite period of time. So how long do you think before Iran has to make a full commitment to the idea of denuclearization?
May 1st. They got to the end of this month. This is not going to drag on forever, because as we have these assets over there, there's something else going on in the world that people are not making the link to. China's economy has been on the ropes for years. They are an export-driven economy. They are not a consumer-based economy. Furthermore, exacerbating that is their population bomb that is going off in real time, where the most consuming portion of the population is either in retirement or nearing retirement. They don't spend, and they never had a big consumer base anyway. So the United States is the largest purchaser as a country, not relative to the rest of the world, of Chinese goods. And we are in a massive fight with them economically right now with this tariff war. And President Xi is hanging on by his fingernails. Now, he's done a great job of consolidating power. They've just had a recent shakeup just this week with a Navy admiral over there who named about 80 flag officers within the Chinese military that are corrupt. So we're looking at maybe going kinetic with Iran, while at the same time, China might be imploding before our very eyes, which can only end one in a couple of ways, none of which are good.
Yeah, I want to hold off on China's ending first. So let's hold off on that for a second. With Iran, I think what worries me most is the groupthink mentality behind the scenes. So again, I'll go back to Iraq 2003. We're going to be greeted as liberators. We don't have to come up with any plans and any alternate scenarios, because the Iraqi people are going to love us for getting rid of the butcher of Baghdad, and we'll pacify the country, and it's going to be easy. And they never planned for the insurgency we saw, and it took 2 years to counter that insurgency. Do you think that we may underestimate Iran's response? Like, we go in with our bombers, we blow up all the nuclear sites, we use the bunker busters, maybe bring in some mother of all bombs to make a show of force. And do you think that in the Trump administration, they're thinking, well, Iran's not going to strike back because they know that we're the more dominant, capable military? Or do you think that they understand that Iran's military, while we're more dominant, does have some capabilities, but they could wreak havoc in the Persian Gulf with the Straits of Hormuz? And also, there are Iranian agents and Hezbollah here in the United States that have been here for a while that do have targets in mind? And would they be activated to try maybe conduct some attacks internally in the United States, making this a much bigger conflict than we actually anticipate?
Yes. The Iranians have already said that they're going to hit any Middle Eastern countries who are Sunni Muslims. The Iranians are Shia. That's an important point of fact that support the United States effort. So we've already moved assets, A-10s into Al Udeid airfield there, into Bahrain, all around the region, into Israel. We've bolstered up with fighter assets. So the Iranians said they're going to hit back. So they do have that capability to hit back. We've seen Tom Homan and DHS and ICE rounding up all these illegals from Tren de Aragua and MS-13, but have we seen them pounding their chest saying, hey, look at all these Iranian operatives we've rounded up from the IRGC, Iranian Republican Guard Corps, or the Ministry of Intelligence, MOIS? Haven't seen any of those. So those people are still here in the country, at least 1,000. So they're not going to sit and watch us bomb the living daylights out of their nuclear program on CNN. They didn't come here for March Madness and the opening of the 2025 baseball season. So there's that aspect of it. So there's nothing good that's going to come out of attacking this nuclear program other than ending the nuclear program. You know, the Iranian people have been under sanctions, almost as much as the Russians, off and on for decades. They're one of the oldest cultures on the planet, and now we're going to go and decimate their nuclear program, which is great. You know, they shouldn't have a nuclear program for regional stabilities, but I think
You don't want to introduce nuclear powers in the most conflicted region throughout human history.
Well, not just that. Real briefly, they're run by the mullahs. The mullahs in Shia Islam are not like the parish priest in Sunni Islam. They are more like the College of Cardinals and the Pope. So they believe in something called the 12th Imam, who was hidden down a well because after Muhammad died, there were 11 imams, and the Sunnis killed all of them, and they hid the 12th one down a well. And their belief that by bringing about the end of times, namely a nuclear holocaust, that the 12th Imam will emerge and Islam will reign on earth across the entire globe. That's their belief. They believe that they need to institute this in order to bring about the 12th Imam. Certainly the mullahs and even some of the most ardent Shias are not ardent supporters of that ideology, nor do they want global Armageddon. So this is worse than a Sophie's choice. I'm so happy I'm not at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in any capacity, even if it's just serving coffee.
I agree. And listen, I mean, if things spiral out of control with Iran, obviously Russia gets more aggressive in Ukraine because they know we're going to have to focus our attention on Iran. But now we bring China into the equation. So you have Xi's back against the wall. You have the Chinese economy that's actually been sputtering for the last few years. It's been an economic downturn. Youth unemployment is increasing, and everything you said about the demographics is so true. Well, the only way out for someone like Xi is to instill that sense of nationalism, right? The rally around the flag, because you had 600 to 800 million Chinese people leave poverty and enter middle class since 1990. Those people don't want to go back into poverty. So in order to distract them, do you think that gives China an opening? Hey, as the United States is involved in the Middle East, now's the time that we try and recapture Taiwan and use it, one mainland China, and get the people to rally around us?
Yes. April is, from a climatological standpoint, is the best time of the 12-month year for a cross-strait move into Taiwan. They built those ferry Bailey bridges capable of moving, not just semis, but, tanks, armored personnel carriers, self-propelled artillery onto the shores of Taiwan. They can do it via a blockade as well. Their missile capabilities can strike almost as far out as Hawaii, which then forces us to keep our carriers at a much greater distance that if we wanted to push back on any kind of naval activity around Taiwan. So that's why I kind of went into the discussion around China when we were talking about the B-2s and Diego Garcia, is that, it's like a water in the balloon. You shift the water to one end of it, there's water missing at the other end of the balloon. So it's not like we have the military today that we had in 1983 or even 93 for that matter. So anywhere, if we want to jump ugly with some other country, it would be foolish to think that our other enemies, whether that be China or Russia or the cartels, decide that hey, this is as good a time as any because these guys are really busy halfway around the world.
Yeah, and let's be honest. I mean, we stretched ourselves thin in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we all saw that. It wasn't like it was a secret. We had to send troops on 4, 5, 6, 7 different deployments. Where you go back to World War II, it was like 1 or 2 deployments max that you were doing. So Iran is much more capable than Iraq and Afghanistan. And then obviously China, Russia, dominant players. Basically, when you look at it, we are in a remarkable period of instability on the world stage, correct?
I've never seen like this in my lifetime. And even if one, reads history books, and I know your audience loves history, as do I and you. It's very different today because the world is much smaller. Our weapons have longer reach. The Chinese have total dominance of outer space over us. Things could get really ugly, and literally, I hate to use that word. I'm sorry. In a matter of days, not a matter of weeks. In 3 or 4 days, things could be dramatically different.
Well, I don't think people realize that. And 2 things. First of all, it's like the worst time possible because of what Biden did to our military, where we're 1/3 below our readiness levels. The recruitment has been terrible. Sure, we're seeing an uptick in recruitment now, but by the time those soldiers can hit a battlefield, it's going to be a while. And you just brought up space capabilities. I remember when everyone mocked President Trump about creating the Space Force, and I'm just sitting there like, we have trillions of dollars in economic activity being controlled by what's in the skies. That is pretty important, is it not?
It is. And our ability to fight war is controlled from outer space. Space Force was about 15 years too late being created. So sleep at the switch for Obama and, Biden. And from my friends that are still in uniform, Space Force is still grossly undermanned as well. So this is not a good situation to be in. When I taught college, one of the things I would do is I would disable undersea cables. We see the Chinese and the Russians doing that today. Most of the world's communications and almost all of its financial transactions go over undersea cables. So we are interconnected and highly vulnerable, and it's been the most unstable that not only have I seen in my lifetime, but even throughout human history.
Now, do you think that connectedness is the one thing that actually kind of keeps us safe and at bay, that all sides kind of know, hey, if this thing explodes, there's really not going to be a winner? Like India would win, I guess, because after we all destroy each other, India would be left standing.
I'd like to think that, but at the onset of World War II, just prior to hostilities, England was Germany's largest trading partner. And everybody said, well, Germany and England will never go to war. War is a nonsensical outburst. It's an extinction burst, literally and figuratively. So I don't really apply much logic and reason when it comes to waging war. I think we wind up in them in most cases completely unplanned and unprepared.
That's a great point. I mean, you look at history, it's replete with examples of just one side just miscalculating, not anticipating it's going to lead to a much wider war. They just miscalculate, and that's what happens. And then you throw into the mix that there's talk of Turkey maybe going into Syria as well, right?
Turkey is an ascendant nation. They see themselves as a regional hegemon. Erdogan has been working tirelessly for decades to move Turkey away from the secular nation that he inherited from Ataturk, obviously not directly, into more of an Islamic state. They have grandiose visions of reinstating the caliphate. I'm not saying any of this is achievable, but they do see themselves as a regional power. And Syria is part of that. The Turks have a problem on their eastern front with the Kurds, but they control the Dardanelles Straits. They control a lot of the raw materials coming out of some of the oil producing countries around the region. So they're a country that nobody ever talks about, but can have a tremendous impact on the global stage in very short order. And it hasn't been missed on Turkish leadership, certainly not on Erdogan.
No, it has one of the largest economies in the world. It has a large military, very capable military, and I think people are foolish for ignoring Turkey. But now that we scared the shit out of everyone because of World War III scenarios, we should turn our attention domestically because I want to get your thoughts on the Department of Justice and the FBI. Obviously, you've been on this podcast before. You and I have both spoken about the ideological corruption, the abuses of power. I mean, we've spoken offline. I thought Pam Bondi was a terrible pick to start with. I mean, there was just so many better people that could have been selected. Um, I have to say, so far, I am disappointed and underwhelmed in the performance of both the DOJ and the FBI. But you were there, okay? You were a supervisory FBI intel analyst. You were there. And what are your thoughts so far?
I'm deeply disappointed, and I took a lot of heat starting on Monday after Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch posted the elevation of Stephen Jensen to the assistant director in charge of the Washington field office, which is an FBI of itself, of its own making. And that got real ugly real fast. Kerry Pickett of the Washington Times today, as well as Miranda Devine, wrote articles, and it's very disappointing. My thought, if I could stay with Steve Jensen for just a
Yeah.
second, he was the architect, and he admits it in his own sworn testimony of the J6 roundup, everything associated with it. And after he successfully did that, he was shuffled off to the training director at Quantico, Virginia, which is exactly what they did with that other good soldier, Peter Strzok. They moved him to the training directorate for a year. So he hid out down there, out of sight, out of mind for a year, but he didn't have his 20 years in so he could retire. So they moved him to Columbia, South Carolina, a very choice duty station. And I think they grossly underestimated what would happen. They, meaning the MAGA crowd and the Trump administration. They pardoned all the J6ers and they figured, okay, enough time has elapsed. The J6 drama is over with. We've got this pit bull of a man who's clearly capable, uh, maybe more so than most, of doing the bidding of the administration. And now he's our pit bull. So let's put him back in the Washington field office where he worked with Timothy Thibault and Steve, I can't think of his other name, the guy who came from Michigan. Um, but we're going to put him back in there and he's going to be our guy. So we're not seeing any changes from the Biden DOJ FBI to the FBI, I'm sorry, to the Trump uh, FBI and DOJ. Well, Pam Bondi is obviously, much more attractive than Merrick Garland. And Kash Patel is quite the public figure going out with HRT and riding around on boats. But there are some serious substantive and reorganizational issues that need to be addressed, and they're doing none of it.
Well, it's concerning to me because, you want to talk about reform. You can't reform an agency by promoting people that abuse their power. I mean, it's clear as day. And I think that you're right. The way it may be viewed is that, okay, well, now it's on our side. He'll be our pit bull. Yet you can't trust someone like that. To me, that no matter what side abuses their power, you get rid of those people and you clean out those agencies to try and restore public trust. What do you think I mean, do you think this whole time that Director Patel and Deputy Director Bongino, like I can't imagine that they were lying for the last, 6 years about who they were. We did see Kash Patel's work when he worked for Devin Nunes and how he exposed the Russian collusion and the FBI abuses of power. Why aren't they doing more to be proactive instead of what I see online is saying, hey, trust us. You don't see everything going on, but trust us. We're making reforms.
I find that so condescending. Trust us. That's like checks in the mail. How many women have heard I love you? I mean, come on. Trust is, baloney. Show us. I find that offensive, the whole trust us thing. I really think that, I hate to say it, but I think Dan Bongino saw an opportunity to make money on his podcast, and he made a lot of money. He did great work on the whole Russia hoax, wrote a couple of books out of it, did great research, great writing, and he deserves a hat tip and respect for that. but there was money to be made in narratives, and he made it. He made it lawfully, good for him. But I don't think that the rhetoric lines up with the action. I learned early on in my Marine Corps career to judge the performance, not the personality. We saw a lot of personality from both those two. You know, Patel said he was going to end the Intel program and turn the Hoover Building into a museum on day one. None of those things have happened. Dan Bongino reached out to a member of the Suspendables over a month ago. Never talked to him again since. We had made a number of proposals to Dan Bongino and Kash Patel. We spent weeks putting it together. They implemented two of them out of the nearly dozen proposals that we made, and none of them were drastic. So we're going to get a continuation. We're going to get BAU, and that does not stand for Behavioral Analysis Unit. It just stands for business as usual. That's what we're going to get, only they're wrapped in the MAGA blanket. So you better not talk bad about them, because if you do, you're an anti-Trumper.
Well, I see people like Garrett O'Boyle, who is still on suspension. He's a whistleblower. He called out the corruption. He called out the abuses of Congress. He was used by the Republicans in Congress as basically a photo op along with Steve Friend. And yet they still haven't been reinstated with their back pay. So to me,
Right.
that's extremely frustrating. Do you have any hope whatsoever, or do you think that this is just the way it's going to be? This is how the FBI will continue to operate, and it's not going to be reformed at all?
They're not going to change. There's no will in Congress for that. The Intel program is a post 9/11 construct. We talked about it on your show. I encourage your listeners to go back and listen to that.
Yeah.
They're not going to end the Intel program. They're going to continue doing exactly what they've been doing, because there's some risk involved there. I mean, what happens if something bad happens in this country and you've been really tinkering aggressively with the mechanism? You're going to get blamed. But I want to point to another example, a better example. When the draft ended, the Marine Corps between 1975 and 1977 took in a lot of people that they wouldn't have taken in otherwise. And at the Commandant in 1978, I think, General Barrows came out with a program called the Expeditious Discharge, whereby if you had at least one non-judicial punishment, in other words, you had to go see the old man and get your wrists smacked and maybe lose a stripe or some pay. All you needed was one. You could put in for the Expeditious Discharge and be let go. No harm, no foul. General under honorable discharge. You still get all your benefits. And the General Barrows said at that time, I don't care if I have to go down to one division and one air wing. There are three of each in the Marine Corps. I don't care if I have to cut my forces by 2/3. I'm going to have the very best Marines in the Marine Corps who want to be here. That's the kind of reform that is needed. We do not have that level of courage in any organization within the government, except for what I'm seeing from maybe a little bit from Secretary Hegseth, who, by the way, we were on Gitmo together in 2004. He was moving my detainees. I was interrogating them. So
Nice.
Shout out to SecDef.
Well, again, something I covered extensively on the P.A.S. Report podcast was the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. And I was hoping that was going to be rescinded on day one. And here we are. Now, I will give them till June 21st, 2025, make it, on the anniversary date, get rid of it. But yeah, I do suspect that you're right, that, it is business as usual. What does it say about the power of the swamp?
This is why DOJ terrifies so many people. No substantive changes will take place until agencies are shuttered, funds have been slashed, people have been fired. You've got to shrink the size of government. And you do that by getting rid of agencies that are not explicitly called for in the Constitution, or at least have a discussion about that. Hey, they weren't called out, but they serve a valuable purpose, and this is what they do. But nothing's going to change in the swamp until you start moving some people out of DC, closing others, and reducing the workforce by at least half. Again, that's why DOJ is so unpopular with so many people. But at 36 trillion in debt and climbing, they better do something, or if not, we're going to be the country collapsing, not China.
Yeah, hopefully people begin to wake up and see that. We've been screaming from the rooftops about it. So, you would think it would come. But unfortunately, people still have their heads buried in the sand. And unfortunately, the swamp is still very much in power. The fourth branch of government, the bureaucracy, continues to expand. And I don't see it contracting really anytime soon. George, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for joining me today. And I'm going to have links up at the P.A.S. report. Everyone should follow George. Great analysis.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.